Lifting the shroud of the death care system was a grave undertaking with grim results. I know, I'm very punny, but seriously, the story I'm going to tell you today, this shit ain't funny. This is a story of what happened when 3 separate entities involved in the death care industry failed in some pretty epic ways. First, let's meet our cast of characters and find out what these people are supposed to be doing. First at bat, we have the embalmers. Pretty much doing as the name implies. This involves preserving bodies in cleaning, disinfecting, restoring, replacing blood with preservative fluids. They can even apply makeup and do a little reconstruction. And some people are true artists at what they do, and I'm sure that's very meaningful to the families. Second up, we have funeral directors. They're the ones that manage like the final leg of the death journey. Retrieve, receive, prepare, can pretty much usually do anything an embalmer can do. They are more involved with the customers. They arrange the funeral service for burial or cremation, celebration of life, fulfilling family wishes and religious concerns, all while offering some compassionate support. They are to ensure that the deceased gets a dignified presentation and send-off. Well, this is the story of what happened when people don't do their jobs and these processes don't go to plan. Let's begin in my hometown of Austin, Texas, where a former funeral director, Adeline Bowie, is currently under investigation by the Funeral Service Commission following allegations of corpse abuse and tampering with government records. Now, y'all know how hard it is to sort out somebody's final disposition if the paperwork ain't right. Well, yeah, she was throwing a wrench in that. So the death care system had its underbelly exposed, and my friends, it ain't pretty. The usual somber and respectful reputation of funeral parlors really took a punch. Adeline Bowie was a former manager, and I've also seen it as owner or co-owner of Capital Mortuary Service, found herself, and rightly so, up to her ass in alligators. Yeah, as if abuse of a corpse weren't enough to make one's skin crawl, Bowie was a shit swizzle with the paperwork, tampering with government records, forging employee signatures, and all this goes back to 2022. According to court documents, a former employee of the mortuary dropped a dime on Bowie's activities. They accused her of forging their name on death certificates. Here's the quote: fraudulently initiated and obtained at least 10 death certificates under my name, end quote. But that was only what he knew of. APD's investigation eventually revealed 128 cases where Bowie used that former employee's name to complete or amend death certificates. What amendments does it need? Is that going to come up later? How would he know if he amended it? Oh, my word. And what was her reasoning? What was her excuse for not using her own name? Well, it was just easier to use his name on the drop-down menu. Well, okay. The anonymous witness went on to tell of some rather suspicious research going on at the facility. Adeline Bowie's age 50, so she's old enough to know better. These experiments, according to her arrest affidavit, involve herself and directing others to inject formaldehyde into severed arms to see what effect it had over time on severed extremities. Well, the former employee that made the complaint showed police a screenshot from a work computer that was dated December 2023, which showed Bowie posting photos and updates about her project under a conversation thread titled Freedom Art Experiment. Girl, she wasn't even trying to hide. Did she believe that all that was okay? She allegedly wrote in the thread, "Let us use this update to monitor our experiment," which was followed by several photos that the police believed were severed and detached arms in various states of decomposition. How decompositioned could it have been that you didn't recognize it immediately as an arm? But that's just gross. Now, she has admitted that she directed her employees to conduct the experiments on bodies to test out different formulas of embalming fluid, some with formaldehyde, some without. Bowie had directed a licensed embalmer to administer the injections. But it wasn't limited to arms. It included cutting heads, arms, and spines from the remains sent to her facility while acting in the capacity of a mortuary. The APD found, power tools with what appear to be scraps of human flesh. So what would you do? I mean, everybody has a boss, and everybody takes directives or possibly loses their job. What would you do? Well, let me tell you a little bit what I know about licensing funeral employees. There are 297 pages of directives that clearly state what is allowed and what's out of bounds. Now, I read a good bit of that, so y'all don't have to, and it is totally clear. It don't take Einstein to get it. You have to know all these rules to pass the exam and get your license. The employees would have known this unless Bowie had presented it to them as legitimate research. Now, if your boss says it's okay, would you go with it? I don't know. But did they know what the facility was licensed for? They should have, and they're supposed to. So there may be other charges if these employees are implicated because they definitely went against their licensing. So afterwards, when the experiments were finished with a particular body part, it was cremated, again, violating all kinds of codes of conduct. And I wonder what she did with the ashes. Now, I hear they make good fertilizer for roses. But there are some religious beliefs that require a body to be in as complete a state as possible for burial, and she kind of walked all over that. I wonder if she just used the bodies that were slated for cremation, or if Granddad's suit sleeves were stuffed with paper. We may never know. So, Adeline Bowie is backpedaling, trying to cover her tracks, by saying that she was working with a company called Med to Market, and that everything was all above board. This company is also in Austin, and says in their own words, their self-description is, "We are a state-of-the-art medical innovation and education center focusing on pushing the boundaries of traditional medical training." Well, okay, they kind of did. In a statement from their spokesperson, it says, and I quote, "We have become aware of the certain allegations related to a mortuary Med to Market had contracted with in performing its important work and mission. Med to Market will, of course, cooperate with law enforcement and state regulatory officials as part of any investigation." So they don't deny it, and they shouldn't. They were involved. But were they lied to as well? Was the facility misrepresented when Med to Market hired Bowie? Well, they should have checked too. Well, because Capital Mortuary is not authorized to do such things, it made the whole thing illegal. And it don't matter who told you to, who asked you to, or who paid you. If the state says no, then that's a hard no. But it does lead me to wonder how much money changed hands. Bowie's lawyer, Jessica Hunn of Smith & Vinson Law Firm, said, in this case, and I quote, "This case involves complexities that are not immediately apparent and should not be sensationalized. Our team remains fully committed to defending and advocating for our client with the expectation of fairness and due process." That's what she said. According to online court records, Bowie is currently out on bond. Well, let's saddle up and head down to Houston, Texas, where authorities have ordered a Southwest Texas funeral home to cease and desist all operations at their facility after the remains of 13 people were found in some pretty deplorable, to say the least, deplorable conditions. The bodies of these 13 people, and there possibly more, have been transferred to other funeral homes. The Houston police is currently still working to identify family members and next of kin of 89 people whose cremated remains were taken from the Richardson mortuary, and so far, only 6 have been claimed. Police were originally called to this charnel house. Calling it a funeral parlor would give it a semblance of dignity, and I assure you there was none. They were called just before noon on April 11th after a worker stabbed a customer, a live customer. Tamara and Devon Magruder, who are siblings, and they had gone to the funeral home because arrangements for their mother's services weren't really going smoothly. Tamara went in and asked to see her mother. She discovered her mother in a box, not yet embalmed, and there were bugs on her face. Can you imagine? No, don't imagine that. And what they saw was so unbelievable that Devon started filming a video capturing the condition of the building, the other bodies laying on the tables. Some were wrapped in plastic, others were in caskets. The video went out on social media, and right away, others who had used this funeral service needed to go and check it out. One family recognized their grandmother only by the clothing she was wearing. But check this out. Grandma was supposed to be cremated last month, and the family had been waiting on the ashes. Devon is still in the hospital in a stab wound that was more serious than first thought. Tamara spoke out on the phone from the hospital and said her brother is in recovery, and so far the district attorney has declined to press charges. Later on that could change. Well, the Texas Funeral Service Commission inspected the Richardson mortuary on the following day, and the bodies were discovered exposed without air conditioning. To put it very mildly, this facility did not meet any sort of health or safety codes. Parts of the roof were missing and exposed to the great outdoors. Among many other things, there was no cold storage. Bodies held at room temperature don't last long. So the cease and desist letter was sent out by the commissioner, states that the owner practiced fraudulent, unprofessional, and deceptive conduct. That business was shut down immediately. The letter from the Texas state listed the steps that the facility must take to reopen, and I told y'all I read them 297 pages. So they have to pass an inspection. They have to provide a roster of all embalmers and funeral directors employed in the last year, submit documentation for all services, embalmings, cremations, and funerals during that period, list all the decedents and next of kin, transport companies and establishments used in that year, and full financial disclosure. Like I said, I read the codes. There is no way on God's green earth that any of this can happen in 2 weeks. So, thankfully, this business is done. HPD is still actively investigating possibilities of tampering with a corpse by the funeral home workers and owners. And as of that Monday, the parking lot is completely blocked off. There is no activity in the building. Attempts to contact Mike Richardson, who is the owner of the funeral home, went unanswered, of course. Acquaintances say that he is currently in process of hiring a lawyer. Good for you, Mike. Good for you. So I saved the worst for last. If I haven't given y'all a little nightmare fuel, this one's going to. 190 bodies were found and removed from a Colorado green funeral home, according to the Associated Press, in October 2023. Let me tell you a little bit about a green funeral and what is supposed to happen. These are funerals done in the most natural burial methods and cremation methods. There's no chemical, formaldehydes, or anything like that. Your body is placed in a biodegradable shroud, in a biodegradable box or casket. You are interred, and then nature takes over. It's a very environmentally friendly way to do stuff. If that's important to you, that can always be an option. There are good companies out there. This one is not. And thankfully, they're no longer in business and the owners are in jail. But let's get on with telling you why. Colorado investigators were called to check out a putrid smell complaint by a neighbor of this funeral home. With that distinctive odor, I bet there was no need for a search warrant. What they found was horrific. It was awful. Possibly as many as 200 abandoned bodies were stacked up like cordwood, like firewood, stacked up, partially covered, unidentified body fluids, inches deep in some places on the floor, blowflies and maggots throughout the building. This is what an FBI agent testified to. So yeah, this was even big enough to call in the FBI. Warrants ensued, of course. Prosecutors got hold of a series of text messages exchanged between Carrie and John Halford, who were the owners of the establishment and a married couple. It showed that they were stressing out about some pretty extreme financial pressures, and they feared that they would be caught for, quote-unquote, mishandling the bodies. But that didn't stop from taking in new business. As the bodies accumulated, one of the couple even suggested they try getting rid of them by digging a big hole, treating it with lye, and then setting it on fire. Well, any of y'all that are familiar with the process of cremation knows that this ain't gonna work. At last count, 23 of the bodies had death dates from back around 2019. This business was established in 2017, so we're not sure how far back we're actually going to go with this. 61 of the bodies were from 2020. FBI agent Andrew Cohen said, and I quote, "The remains include adults, infants, and fetuses. They were all being stored at room temperature in a neglected building in a small Rocky Mountain town of Penrose." End quote. Oh my word, if you believe in such things, how haunted is this place now? But the building was eventually torn down because who would want that mess afterwards? It would just be gross. He also went on to say, "It looks like something you'd like to forget, but you can't." He said this during a hearing for one of the funeral home's co-owners, that the Penrose building had makeshift refrigeration units, but Cohen said that those were not operating when the bodies were found. Now, this is a very kind of squat, low-roofed building that was near a post office and a few scattered homes. So people really noticed the odor. And what was separating the buildings was empty lots of dry grass, and it had a lot of like semi-trailers parked on it. I don't know whose those were, if they had anything to do with the business we're talking about. But did y'all look in the trailers? I need to know. Investigators also found animal remains and bags of packaged concrete. Some of the relatives of the deceased had received fake ashes. Rather than cremated remains, they got an urn full of concrete because the loved one's body was not dealt with. And yeah, John had claimed that the reason for this was that he was practicing taxidermy. Now, ain't that ironic? In November, police arrested Carrie and John Halford in Oklahoma because the married couple had fled Colorado trying to avoid the law. Mental giants, ain't they? Because once the FBI is involved, state lines don't matter. State and local law enforcement agencies can request the assistance of FBI in investigations, and then, of course, it's up to the FBI to participate or not, especially if they need the FBI's expertise, resources, or advanced technology. And my friends, they needed all of this. Every bit. The Halfords are accused of abusing corpses, theft, laundering money, and forging documents. Over several years at the Return to Nature Funeral Home, which is based in Colorado Springs, but the remains were stored in the nearby Penrose. I think it's about 15-20 minutes away, but I'm not real sure. They are each charged with 190 counts of corpse abuse, 5 counts of theft, 4 counts of money laundering, over 50 counts of forgery, and to add to our disdain for these freaks, they also face 15 further charges alleging they spent $882,300 in pandemic relief funds on items that included a GMC Yukon and Infiniti, I'm not sure which model, worth over $120,000. They also had trips to California, Florida, Las Vegas, $31,000 in cryptocurrency. She had some laser body sculpting. And there's details of some luxury purchases from Gucci and Tiffany, all while corpses are piling up. Yeah, so it was more beneficial to her to spend money on other things than actually doing the business she was hired to do. That was the price of the decedent's dignity. Well, Carrie and John have separate attorneys, and it looks like there is no honor among thieves. I wonder if this was any part of the plan, if they knew who each other was when they got married. Did they know, and it was just some sort of attraction that allowed them to work together in this way? But it seems a pretty far away for John, who claims to be third generation in death care. I'm eager to see if either one of them invokes the spousal privilege. I'll bet you $1 they don't. They will roll on each other so fast. Carrie Halford's attorney, Michael Stasninski, did not immediately challenge the evidence from the scene that was presented by prosecutors, and how could he? There was the evidence right there. All he did was question the cell phone data that prosecutors had that placed Carrie Halford on the Penrose facility with her husband, trying to say that she was aware but was not hands-on. Well, don't that make everything better? The defense will have another chance to argue against the evidence during a hearing that was set for, on down the road. Stasinski said that after the hearing, he could not talk about the case outside of court. John Halford is still sitting in lockup at the El Paso County Jail after his bond was lowered from $2 million to $100,000. Who did that? I mean, seriously, he is a flight risk. He's already proven that. His attorney, Adam Steigerwald, did not return any messages or offer up any comments. Several families who had hired the Return to Nature company to cremate their relatives have told Associated Press that the FBI confirmed that their loved ones' remains were among the decaying bodies. It makes me sick for them. What they put those people through, can you imagine? No, don't imagine that either. They're not only having to relive the death, but also maybe experiencing so many emotions. I mean, do they think they made a mistake? Could they have done better? They're taking on a lot of it themselves. But honestly, people, I'm giving you a hug from here and telling you that I know monsters don't always look like monsters. You trusted a system that has the most sacred trust attached to it, and they failed you. John Halford was worried as far back as 2020 about getting caught, according to the prosecutors. In part of this text exchange that he had with his wife, he said, "My one and only focus is keeping us out of jail." Other text messages between the Halfords included selling off assets to cover expenses and worrying about losing everything if they were exposed. John Halford messaged his wife that they need to begin restoring the building in Penrose and appeared to suggest various ways to get rid of the bodies. And that's, he's the one that suggested dig a hole and set a fire, and he should know better because he's supposed to have all this experience. According to Kevin Clark, an investigator with the district attorney's office, the options presented between the Halfords were build a new machine. Now, I'm thinking they probably meant a crematory furnace, but I don't know because these sick fucks, it could be anything. And then here's the part about dig a big hole and use lye, dig a big hole and build a fire. Goes on to say, I go to prison, which is probably going to happen. Yeah, he already knew. Yet in another text from last year, Halford wrote about dealing with a decaying body, and in the same message, gave his wife his dinner order. It goes, and I quote, "I want to take a shower as soon as I get back because while making a transfer, I got people juice on me. I want a double cheeseburger, lettuce wrapped with everything, minus tomatoes, please." Because he could do all the blood and guts, but he can't eat a tomato. All right. The next text said, and according to the investigator Clark, further details on how the bodies came to be mishandled, but those can't be publicly released yet because I think it's going to be part of the evidence, so we don't want to mess with that. Efforts to identify the bodies are using fingerprints, dental records, medical hardware, and DNA. Officials plan in coming days, and like I said, they just tore the building down. Once they had gotten about as much out of the building as they could, they took it down for the benefit of the neighborhood. One of the bodies being investigated included that of a former Army Sergeant First Class who was believed to have been buried in a veteran cemetery. Investigators exhumed the wooden casket and found the remains of a person that was not even the gender of the person that was to be interred there. The veteran, who was not identified in court, was later given a funeral with full military honors at Pikes Peak National Cemetery. In December, relatives who knew or feared that their loved ones were among the abandoned bodies watched in person for the first time as the Halfords appeared before a judge. One woman held up a photo of her late son, who she thinks may be among the mishandled bodies. How painful must that have been? The AP previously reported that the Halfords missed tax payments. They were evicted from one of their properties and were sued for unpaid bills by a crematory that quit doing business with them about a year ago. According to public records and interviews with people that worked with and knew them, they owed money, big money, to everybody. Colorado is a spousal privilege state. That means that under Colorado law, a spouse cannot be compelled to testify against another spouse in court. Confidential communications between the spouses during the marriage is also protected unless one person gives it up. Now, this rule states that I cannot compel you to testify against your spouse, but testimony voluntarily given and evidence voluntarily given is acceptable and admissible. So I'm beginning to think they're going to roll on each other already. So what kind of plea deal can be sweetened if a rat rats out the other rat? You know, I'm eagerly awaiting the trial. So John and Carrie were slated to appear for a sentencing hearing after the couple had pled guilty to 190 counts of abuse of a corpse. But earlier this week, the couple waived their appearance in court due to sentencing being postponed. So if nothing's going to happen, they don't have to show up, or they were just told not to. Here's what happened. Judge Eric Bentley adjourned the Halford state sentencing hearing. He said it was an agonizing choice, but explaining that ongoing delays in the couple's parallel federal proceedings necessitated postponement. Essentially, the G-men are still building the case. The judge underscored the substantial risk of subsequent appellate courts overturning any sentence imposed. So if you don't want to get overturned later, you got to make sure that all the ducks are in a row when you make announcements. So in light of that, we don't want to just throw the book at them. We want to throw all the books at them. At a hearing in October, the Halfords pled guilty in court to one count of wire fraud, with the remaining 14 counts to be dismissed as part of a plea agreement, if it's accepted by the court. Well, that didn't happen. Carrie Halford later withdrew her guilty plea after Judge Nina Wang found the plea agreements not to be in the public interest and informed the Halfords that there may be some new terms. According to the court documents, John Halford decided to keep his guilty plea. Carrie is now set to go to trial in her federal case in September, while John is scheduled to be sentenced in June. I can't wait. I'm eagerly awaiting this. Judge Bentley explained that John Halford's state sentencing, contingent on his federal sentencing, is postponed until August. Well, we're postponed again, but we know why. Carrie Halford's trial necessitates a later sentencing conference. The plea deal proposes 20 years for John and 15 to 20 for Carrie, dismissing other charges. Some victims voiced concerns about the concurrent sentencing. While state and federal sentences can run concurrently, that means they're served at the same time. But that's not up to them. Federal courts, that's the FBI, and those associated with the federal court system, have the discretion whether to impose sentences concurrently or consecutively, which means they would have to serve all of their state time and then start serving on the federal time. So that 20-year cap might not mean a damn thing. Good move on the part of the judges. We want everything we can thrown at these asshats. There's no indication that the state regulators had ever visited this site or contacted the Halfords until more than 10 months after the Penrose Funeral Home's registration expired. That, this could have come about a lot sooner. State lawmakers gave regulators the authority to inspect funeral homes without owners' consent last year, but no additional funding or personnel was provided for increased inspections. So you have permission to go and do your job, but the bean counters don't approve the time. I'm shaking my damn head again. Thanks, y'all, for listening. That's me for this time. Sweet dreams. I'll see you next week.